Why do millions of Christians reject the Mass as a sacrifice when the early church unanimously taught it, Scripture points to it, and even ancient Jewish worship patterns demand it? Many Protestants argue that calling the Mass a sacrifice contradicts the book of Hebrews, which says Christ offered himself once for all. They believe Catholics are re-crucifying Jesus every Sunday. But here's the problem with that objection. It misunderstands both what Catholics actually teach and what ancient Jewish sacrifice really meant. The Catholic Church has never claimed Christ dies again at Mass. Instead, the Church teaches that the one sacrifice of Calvary is made present sacramentally, not repeated. When you examine the Todah sacrifice from ancient Israel, the prophecy in Malachi, and what the earliest Christians actually believed, a striking pattern emerges. This pattern doesn't just support the Catholic view of the Mass as sacrifice. It actually forces honest readers to defend it. The confusion starts with how modern people think about memorial and sacrifice. When someone today says, "Remember me," they mean keep me in your thoughts. But that's not what biblical memorial meant in the ancient Jewish world. The Hebrew word zikaron and its Greek equivalent anamnesis referred to something far more powerful than mental recollection. A biblical memorial was a liturgical act that made a past-saving event present and effective for the worshipper. Consider the Passover. Jewish families didn't just recall the Exodus from Egypt as a nice story. The Mishnah explicitly teaches that in every generation, each person must see himself as if he personally went out from Egypt. The saving event was made present through the ritual, not just remembered as distant history. This is the framework Jesus used when he instituted the Eucharist during the Last Supper and commanded his disciples to do this in remembrance of him. Now add to this the Todah sacrifice, a specific type of thanksgiving offering in ancient Israel. The Todah included 4 elements: a sacrificial lamb, consecrated bread, a cup of wine over which thanksgiving was pronounced, and psalms of praise. When someone was delivered from mortal danger, they would bring this offering to the temple. The worshipper would sacrifice the lamb, bless the bread and wine, sing thanksgiving psalms, and share a communal meal in God's presence. King David institutionalized continual praise and thanksgiving in Israel's worship. Thanksgiving became the permanent posture of Israel before God. The rabbis even had a tradition preserved in the Vayikra Rabbah declaring that when the Messiah comes, all sacrifices will cease except the Todah. All hymns will cease except hymns of thanksgiving. When the rabbis translated the Hebrew scriptures into Greek, they chose one specific word for Todah, Eucharistia, thanksgiving. If you're interested in deepening your faith, hit like and tell me where you're watching from. Consider subscribing to stay rooted in Catholic truth. Support our videos, team, and tools. Link in description or scan the QR code on screen. But here's where this ancient pattern becomes unavoidable. At the Last Supper, Jesus gathered his disciples for Passover, itself understood as a Todah for Israel's deliverance from death in Egypt. During this meal, Jesus deliberately included every element of the Todah sacrifice. He became the Passover lamb, as St. Paul wrote, "Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed." He took bread, gave thanks using the Greek verb form of Eucharistia, and declared, "This is my body, which is given for you." He took the cup, gave thanks again, and said, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." He and the disciples sang the Hallel Psalms, including Psalm 116, the Todah psalm that says, "I will offer to you the sacrifice of thanksgiving." Then Jesus commanded, "Do this in remembrance of me," using anamnesis, the word for covenant memorial that makes past events present. By consecrating the bread and wine separately, Jesus mystically represented the separation of his blood from his body, which is precisely what occurs in violent death. He was sacramentally enacting his death before it physically happened on Calvary. Jesus established the Christian Todah, the messianic sacrifice that the rabbis said would remain. The prophet Malachi predicted this universal worship 7 centuries before Christ. God declared through Malachi, "From the rising of the sun to its setting, my name will be great among the nations, and in every place incense will be offered to my name and a pure offering." This prophecy has specific characteristics. The offering would be universal, made in every place among the nations. It would be perpetual, offered continuously as the sun rises and sets around the globe. It would be pure and acceptable to God. It would be offered by Gentiles. It would replace the corrupt Levitical system. The earliest Christians immediately recognized this prophecy as describing the Eucharist. The Didache, written around late 1st century, quotes Malachi directly and applies it to the Christian assembly, saying, "On the Lord's day gather together, break bread, and give thanks, for this is what was spoken by the Lord. In every place and time, offer me a pure sacrifice." Saint Justin Martyr, around the year 150, wrote that God speaks about the sacrifices offered to him in every place by us Gentiles. That is the bread of the Eucharist and likewise the cup. Saint Irenaeus, around the year 180, declared that Christ taught the new sacrifice of the new covenant, of which Malachi had signified beforehand. Saint Cyprian of Carthage made the connection even more explicit in his letter to Cecilius. He wrote that Christ is himself the chief priest of God the Father and has first offered himself a sacrifice to the Father and has commanded this to be done in commemoration of himself. Certainly that priest truly discharges the office of Christ, who imitates that which Christ did, and he then offers a true and full sacrifice in the church to God the Father when he proceeds to offer it according to what he sees Christ himself to have offered. Cyprian continues, "Because we make mention of his passion in all sacrifices, for the Lord's passion is the sacrifice which we offer, we ought to do nothing else than what he did. The Mass is celebrated on every continent at virtually every hour. As the sun rises across the globe, the sacrifice of the Mass is continually offered." No other Christian practice fits Malachi's prophecy with this precision. One challenge remains though, and it's the one Protestants raise most often. The objection goes like this. The book of Hebrews says, Christ offered himself once for all, so any ongoing sacrifice denies the finished work of Calvary. But read Hebrews carefully. Hebrews chapter 7 verse 24 through 25 says Christ holds his priesthood permanently because he continues forever. Consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. If Christ's priesthood is eternal, and he always lives to exercise it, what does an eternal priest do? Priests offer sacrifices. The once for all language emphasizes three truths Catholics fully affirm. Christ does not die repeatedly. No additional victim is needed. The single sacrifice is eternally present in heaven. The book of Revelation shows a lamb standing as though it had been slain, using the Greek perfect tense to indicate completed action with ongoing effects. The sacrifice happened once in history, but remains eternally present in God's eternal now. Hebrews chapter 13 explicitly mentions we have an altar, indicating liturgical worship continues. Recent scholarship has identified the sacrifice of praise in Hebrews chapter 13 verse 15 as an allusion to the Todah sacrifice. This phrase is the exact Greek translation of the Hebrew for Todah, offering in the book of Leviticus chapter 7 verse 12. The author of Hebrews is not rejecting liturgical sacrifice, but reconfiguring it around Christ. Share this with a friend who wrestles with this question. Check the description for more resources. The Catholic position doesn't contradict Hebrews. It fulfills what Hebrews points toward. Here's the profound irony. Protestants affirm that God divinely instituted the Old Testament sacrifices. They acknowledge these sacrifices foreshadowed Christ. They recognize Jesus used explicit sacrificial language at the Last Supper. They admit Malachi prophesied a universal pure offering. They concede the early church universally understood the Eucharist as sacrifice. Yet they insist Jesus did not intend to establish perpetual sacrificial worship and that the unanimous testimony of the church for 1500 years was wrong. That position requires believing the apostles misunderstood Jesus, the Didache got it wrong while apostles still lived, Justin Martyr and Irenaeus and Cyprian and every father misinterpreted scripture, and Malachi's prophecy has no clear fulfillment. The ancient Jewish Todah sacrifice included lamb, bread, wine, and thanksgiving psalms. Jesus fulfilled every element at the Last Supper and commanded his church to continue it. The rabbis said only Todah would remain when Messiah came. That's exactly what happened. The Mass is the Todah that never ends, offered from the rising of the sun to its setting, making present the one perfect sacrifice of Christ across time and space. If this helped you understand why the Mass is biblical, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more Catholic apologetics rooted in scripture and tradition. Check out our web app for daily resources and soul search to grow deeper in faith. The sacrifice the prophets foretold is the sacrifice we still offer. One Lord, one faith, one Eucharist forever.